Right, so the Houthis in Yemen, they've assembled on a picket line in effect at the Bab-El-Mandeb Strait in the southern end of the Red Sea, picketing Israel, picketing ships going to Israel and picketing ships coming from Israel. They have told the world, we're holding strike action for the atrocities Israel are committing in Gaza. They're violating international law, and if you won't do something about it, they say to the rest of the world, then we will. They are manning their picket line with drones and speedboats and missiles. They're drawing attention to the genocide happening and saying to every country attempting to cross their picket line, they won't let you. There will be no scabs here, no tolerance for that, with those allying themselves with Israel. Military action, much like industrial action, comes to an end when people get around the table and negotiate and hammer out a deal. But the Western overseers of Israel, their backers, their buddies, their business associates, their trade partners, they don't like this, do they? So not only are the US and the UK now saying they will be scabs and they will try to get past this picket and continue seeking to break down Yemen's solidarity picket line with Gaza, but they're going to do it with direct military action aimed at the Houthis themselves. No money for Gaza, but money for war against Yemen. No peace for Gaza, no dealing with a genocidal nation in Israel, but instead threats aimed at those standing by Gaza and against the genocide. What a sick society the West has become, and what pathetic creatures pass for world leaders placing themselves on the wrong side of history here in their determination to treat Israel as an exception even now. Right, so those plucky Houthis have caused more and more problems for poor Israel, hurting their poor whittled economy, so their backers in the West are coming to their rescue. Not the rescue of the people of Gaza, though, who are being wiped out. Their lands ethnically cleansed, not the 10,000 kids killed. That doesn't motivate them. But 2 tankers in the Red Sea targeted by Yemen, and watch them mobilise now. What, they can't move fast enough. Oops, what am I thinking? I call them Yemen and Houthis so far, haven't I? I've forgotten the media are all about blaming Iran for all of this, aren't they? So we'd better say Iran-backed Houthis, not US-backed Israel, though. We can't say that. That'd be journalism, wouldn't it? But let's turn to what our government here in the UK are saying, because reports dropping this morning are that our unelected Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and his mandateless gang of cabinet miscreants are planning airstrikes on Houthi rebels, emboldened by the fact the US has apparently sunk 3 Yemeni boats harassing a tanker. Yemenis died for Israel's convenience, and we're now saying, and by we I mean the UK government, they aren't doing any of this in my name, want some of that action too. What does Sunak want? A pat on the head by Netanyahu? Well, I wouldn't put it past him. The living daylights are getting blasted out of Gaza and their people, and our government wants to take military action against those brave enough to take a stand against that. This is the action of a bully and a coward, frankly, to target a poor Arab nation standing in solidarity with an occupied Arab territory. Occupied for 56 years, let's not forget, in flagrant disregard of international law, for decades long, that nobody has done anything about. South Africa are now doing something via the courts, and Yemen are via interference. The quote of the day on this, though, has to come from our utterly talentless and massively over-promoted Defence Secretary Grant Shapps, who, having taken to the Tory graph, as all Tories do, to set out their stall, has said, "The Houthis should be under no misunderstanding. We are committed to holding malign actors accountable for unlawful seizures and attacks." Malign actors? Of course, standing up for Palestine in the face of genocide, malignant. You compare what the Houthis are doing to acting like some kind of a tumour in the Red Sea to be cut out. That kind of language is better reserved for your rancid, stinking party than a nation acting to stand against genocide, and a spiv like Shapps should actually take on board the fact that if we were upholding international law in regard to Israel's genocide instead of every country except for South Africa, who are signatories of that, sitting on their hands over it, perhaps the Houthis wouldn't have felt the need to take matters into their own hands here. Perhaps instead of threatening war on Yemen, as the US and UK seem intent on doing, they could get the UN involved here too. After all, Yemen are, strictly speaking, in violation of Article 37 of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, the Strait being a framework waterway for global trade. But no, let's go with missiles and warships instead. It really does speak of the toothlessness of the UN, doesn't it, when they get sideswiped every single time. They're supposed to exist to prevent all this nonsense, but it only works for as long as nations bother with it. It's not just Shapps making a dick of himself on the Tory benches over this, though. Tory benches is a bit of a stretch, little bit of a stretch when it comes to bringing up the unelected Foreign Secretary, of course, courtesy of a quick gong to get him into the House of Lords, Lord David Cameron. He's been complaining to Iran's foreign minister, apparently. His opposite number in Iran. Let's blame Iran again. All that Iran-backed stuff, of course. Hossein Amir-Abdollahian, I butchered his name completely, I've no doubt, and took to Twitter to tell us all about his conversation with this chap. And he said, I spoke to Amir-Abdollahian today about Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, which threaten innocent lives and the global economy. I made clear that Iran shares responsibility for preventing these attacks, given their long-standing support to the Houthis. Well, I hope he told you exactly what he thought of you. I hope he turned around and said back, I make clear that everything happening in Gaza at Israel's hand is yours and America's shared responsibility for preventing the genocide, given your long-standing support for Israel. That's what I would have done. That's what I would have said. It's the same difference, isn't it? Cameron wasn't the only one speaking out for the government either, though, because, of course, a statement got issued on the government's behalf. And their spokesperson said, the situation in the Red Sea is incredibly serious, and the Houthi attacks are unacceptable and destabilising. As you would expect, while planning is underway for a range of scenarios, no decisions have yet been made, and we continue to pursue all diplomatic routes. We call for the Iranian-backed Houthi to cease these illegal attacks, and we are working with allies and partners to protect freedom of navigation. Well, of course the Houthi attacks are destabilising. They're supposed to be, but only if you're trying to do business with Israel, or are Israel yourself. All other shipping can pass freely. They leave you alone. They don't care about you. You can come and go as you please. As for calling out these illegal attacks, what about Israel committing genocide? Priorities, people. Yours are more twisted than a dozen verses of She Sells Seashells on the Seashore. Of course, condemnation to all of this willy-waving and posturing by the Tories, embarrassingly on the wrong side of the argument, has come from all manner of sources. Sinn Féin MP Chris Hazard weighed in as one example, saying, performative stunt from Tories desperate to replay the Falklands card. Houthis have faced a barrage of Saudi airstrikes for 9 years, yet still have the capacity to enforce a naval blockade against the Israeli regime. Would be much quicker for the US and Britain to stop arming Israel. He's bang on. Speaks volumes for the Yemeni resilience too. And I would also add the US have been here before, to little or no avail. It's worth mentioning that reports are that in 40 days of Houthi interference, they've not killed anyone. Yet the minute the US shows up, they destroy 3 Houthi boats with all hands. Standing up for Palestine gets you killed by the same people backing the genocidalists. US-backed Israel, as the news never says, of course. There's also no escaping the fact the more military action that takes place in the very narrow, rather perilous Bab-El-Mandeb Strait, the more interference to shipping you'll be causing. So I dare say the Houthis will be rather bullish in response to all of this. Iran's response has been more interesting still. They've actually piped up. The Iran Observer, one of their state news outlets, has tweeted out, breaking! US immediately de-escalates tensions with Yemen. US says not out for wider Middle East conflict or war with Houthis. It seems news of a Western attack on Yemen was also nothing more than a bluff by a British newspaper. Well, now that's interesting, isn't it? Especially in light of comments from our government. Now, of course, this is Iran state media, you could be arguing. They could say anything. They might choose to be saying this. They may want to say this. They might want to say, oh, it's all nonsense. But equally, they are talking about our media here. The US have, of course, been here before and been spanked, as I've just said. They likely don't want a rerun against Yemen. Could it just be bluff? Not just from the Tory graph, but from Tory politicians too. Is it just desperation for headlines as they head into a general election this year, where they look certain to lose, and they think this appeals to the vast majority of the British public? I don't think it does. I wouldn't put it past them to use genocide and tragedy to try and score some points, though, would you? It's also not like they aren't militarily more preoccupied with Israel either. All these flights out of Cyprus going on, and now 1,000 more troops, our troops, stationed in the Eastern Mediterranean, and we don't know where half of them are. They won't tell us. Well, perhaps they should. What are they all doing out there? Why have you suddenly sent all these more troops out there? You should definitely watch this video next to learn more about that story, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.